Hi, James back with another review. Today we're going to be talking about Use of Weapons by Iain M. Banks. I read this a long time ago in the reality of where you're watching this because I've been real slack on doing video content this year for reasons, I don't know. So Use of Weapons is the third official book. It's the third book in the Culture series by Iain M. Banks, a Scottish sci-fi novelist. Much like the other Culture books, this one is a standalone kind of thing. You don't have to have read the other Culture books to really understand it. But the cut and thrust of what the Culture is for the uninitiated is the Culture universe is a post-scarcity space opera setting, basically. Humanity has evolved now to they've advanced to the point where everyday needs are just catered for everyone, and the Culture is this hodgepodge of different people from all over space that have just decided to live under this banner of the Culture, and they use hyper advanced technology to create essentially a space socialist utopia for themselves. And lots of the books basically focus on what is called special circumstances, which is a branch of what is kind of the Culture's military, even though they don't have a standing military as such. They are the people that go out and deal with potentially politically tricky developments in space, in the universe in general. So Use of Weapons is a very interesting book in a lot of ways. The first book in this series, Consider Phlebus, I was not a fan of. It's well documented now that I didn't really rate that book very highly. What I would consider this would be what if we tried to do what Consider Phlebus tried to do kind of again, but we'll make it a lot better. This, I think, was Banks kind of taking the ideas that he had at the start of his sci-fi writing journey and really sort of coming to grips with how to work those into a more compelling narrative. The structure of this book is one of the key things that stands out about it, basically from other sci-fi books. It follows a dual narrative where we learn about this Culture agent called Zakalwe. And the first narrative follows he's been given this mission to assist in finding somebody that can help the Culture out with a tense political situation that could have some impacts on the galaxy, have some impacts on the Culture. He's kind of like one of the Culture's troubleshooters. He's not officially part of the Culture himself, but he's used by the Culture to essentially fight proxy wars for them. He's like a war fighting specialist. So he's given a mission by an old compatriot, Diziet Smar, who is one of these special circumstance Culture agents. And it's sort of the main narrative follows that timeline of him sort of getting the mission and doing the mission for the Culture. But then we get told in a reverse narrative about Zakalwe's upbringing, basically, and what led him to the point where he is now. What's interesting about it is the primary narrative is told in chronological order from start to end, but the background story for Zakalwe is told in reverse chronological order. So the first scenes we read are the most recent things that have happened to him, and then as we go further in the book, we go further and further into his past to really get a sense of sort of his journey to becoming the man that he is. So it's an interesting narrative device. I think it was kind of underutilized because a lot of the background story of Zakalwe, at the point where we learn about certain things in his past, they don't always match up that well with what's happening in the present day narrative, if that makes any sense at all. It's kind of a confusing book to kind of analyze in that way, because the plot structure is so different to how a normal plot structure is. Like, if you took the parts as separate, the main narrative, the chronological order narrative, is handled pretty reasonably well. We're introduced to Dizzy at Smar in the beginning of the novel, and I think this is one of the characters where I'm not sure what her purpose was in the narrative, like, other than setting the plot in motion and finding Zakalwe to give him the mission. She doesn't do a whole lot in the plot, and the beginning of the story really is actually kind of focused on her in a lot of ways, where it sort of builds up to think, okay, this is going to be our protagonist for or at least a secondary protagonist, and then she kind of just sort of fades into the background after the first act, and I think that was kind of a wasted opportunity because she's kind of an interesting character. She comes up in like the State of the Art, which is a short story based in the Culture universe. She's more of a focus in that, so I don't fully understand why she was cut out of the narrative. I think she could have been played into it more to develop Zakalwe's chronological order story a little bit better. But as we go through, that first story is very... It's kind of... It has... That's the story that gives me the Consider Phlebus vibes, because it has that same kind of action set piece moments in there. It has that I'm a man on a mission who's, you know, been hired to do this proxy war thing by this alien species that I'm kind of affiliated with but not a part of. It has those same sort of elements that Phlebus has, but it does them in a way that's much more coherent. Like, you understand Zakalwe as a character more, and you get his growth and why he does things and things like that. You understand that more than you do with a character like Horza from Consider Phlebus, where he's kind of tangential to the story and his character doesn't really develop along with the narrative. So you get a lot of the good stuff there. The reverse chronological stuff it's interesting, like, taken in isolation, but I don't feel like it props up the main story enough, where I feel like interweaving them was really strictly necessary, and I don't think doing it in reverse chronological order was, strictly speaking, necessary either. It kind of all just leads to a big plot twist, and I think the plot twist was surprising. Could have been done a lot better. It could have had a lot more thematic punch. I think the way that Banks decided to use the twist was against the sort of themes that we'd gone for in the main story. I just think I would have preferred to see it done better. But that said, the writing style that Banks uses is really coming into its own here. The culture universe that he created, where Phlebus was like sort of throwing ideas at a wall and seeing what sticks, this is a much more confident effort in terms of developing that world and utilizing aspects of that world to tell a good story in, and I think that's done really well. There's a lot of humor in there as well. It's not, even though it's a story about war and the effects on war on people's psyche and stuff, there's still a lot of time Banks uses to be satirical in a lot of ways and, you know, just have some fun with the universe that he's created. So, use of weapons, great, good book. I don't know, I would hesitate to say it's a great story. Maybe it's one that I need to reread maybe once, maybe twice more, just to sort of get more out of sort of this structure and what it's trying to do. I don't think the structure obfuscates what the point of the novel is, but I think it kind of makes it a little bit harder to follow, and it's going to take some real analysis of the different ways the plots weave together to really understand what the purpose of doing the story in that way was. But if you are a fan of the culture, then it's obviously worth a read. If you haven't read a culture book before, I would say it potentially is a good place to start. You know, it has more of those bombastic sci-fi elements that Player of Games lacks. Player of Games being the second novel in the series. Go and check out my review for that if you want to. It has more of those bombastic elements that Phlebus has, but it has more of a coherent plot structure, kind of. It has more of a consistent marriage of character and plot that make it more appealing to me personally. So if you haven't read Culture series before and you're interested to see what it's about, this is probably a better example of what it can do and what it was intended to be for, rather than Phlebus, which is obviously the debut of the series. So there you go, my thoughts on Use of Weapons by Iain M. Banks. Overall it was really good. I think I gave it like 4 stars. It misses 5 stars just because I feel that there were some elements that didn't appeal to me personally, but hey ho, that's par for the course for any read, isn't it really? So yeah, good book, can't really argue with that. So that's it, that's my thoughts. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, do comment, subscribe, all the rest of it, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.